Hello everyone, you're watching Average Joe Video. I'm Joe, and today I'm going to show you how to replace the brake shoes, brake drums, and springs on a 2018 Club Car Precedent. So let's get started. The first step is to switch the key to the off position. Next, raise the seat and switch the car to the toe position. This is very important because we want to make sure the wheels cannot be under power while we are working on the brake assemblies. Next, I need to chock the front wheels. In this case, I am placing 2x4s in front and behind each of the front wheels. This will ensure that the cart does not move when I raise the rear end. Once the wheels are chocked, I need to disengage the parking brake. If you forget and leave the parking brake engaged, you will not be able to remove the drums from the brake assemblies. Keep in mind that the golf cart only has brakes on the rear axle. That's why it's so important that the front wheels are chocked. Now it's time to remove the wheel cover assemblies on each side. This is so that we can loosen the lug nuts prior to raising the rear end of the cart. Today, I'm going to be using an impact wrench, so this is not as big of a deal if you have an impact wrench. However, if you are using a traditional socket, you definitely want to make sure that you complete this step prior to raising the cart. That way you can get the lug nuts off much easier whenever it's in the air. Now that the wheel covers are removed, I'm going to use the impact wrench to loosen the lug nuts. I'm trying to be careful that I don't take them off the whole way. Again, this is not absolutely necessary since I'm using an impact wrench. Notice that I have an extension on there. That's because with this particular impact gun, I was not able to get it to go squarely on the lug nuts without using the extension, and I did not want to round them off. So that's why I'm setting it up this way. That's the only extension that I have. It is a bit long, but it will still do the job. Now that the lug nuts are loose on each side, it's time to raise the cart. For this, I'm going to simply use a floor jack. This particular jack is a 3-ton low-profile jack that I purchased from Harbor Freight. I was able to get this for around $125 with the coupon. So if you're looking for a good jack for this use, this works perfect. Obviously, you can see that with the rear seat on there, it is a reach getting under the cart, but it still works very well. Next, I'm going to place jack stands under the axle tubes on each side. Now this is a very important step because obviously working on the brake mechanisms, you do need some stability. This is not like we're simply just changing out one tire. Make sure that you use the jack stands so that way you're safe. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and be sure to give this video a big thumbs up. The first step is to remove the passenger side wheel. To do this, you're going to need a 3/4 inch socket. I also want to mention that the process I'm going to show you does not require the removal of the axle shaft. Removing the axle shaft is often the best way to save money when you're taking your cart to a shop. That's because the shop can replace the entire brake cluster, and this saves them a little bit of shop labor and ultimately saves you money in the end. However, when you're working on the cart yourself, it's actually just as simple to replace the other brake components without removing the axle shaft, and that's what I'm going to show you today. All you need is a little bit of time and some basic hand tools, and you can complete this job successfully while also saving hundreds of dollars. After the wheel is removed, it is time to remove the brake drum. You can oftentimes remove the brake drum by simply wiggling the drum back and forth and it will slide off. If the drum does not slide off easily, you may need to use a rubber mallet and hit the drum first and then work the drum off of the brake assembly. Remember, if you left the parking brake engaged, that will stop the drum from sliding off of the assembly. Next, I'm going to remove the bottom spring using a pair of vice grip pliers. In this case, I removed the bottom spring prior to removing the retaining pins and retaining clips. This allows a little bit more room to get your pliers in there and pull the spring off. However, the spring is much tighter. When I go to do the driver's side in part 2, I will actually remove the retaining pins and clips first, and then I will remove the lower spring. That way you can make that decision for yourself which method you prefer. Now it is time to remove the retaining pins and clips on each side. When I went to remove the left-hand retaining pin and clip, I pushed in on the clip with the flathead screwdriver, and then I was able to use my rubber glove to simply rotate the pin from behind. I did not need to use pliers in that case. However, on the right-hand side, you can see that I pushed the clip in with the flathead part of the screwdriver, and then I used needle nose pliers to rotate the pin so that the flat end is vertical. Once the pins, clips, and lower spring are removed, we are ready to remove the brake shoes. Simply pull the shoes apart with the spring intact to remove them from the slots at the top of the backing plate. Now it's time to spray everything down with brake cleaner. I am using CRC Brake Clean, and this is the non-chlorinated version. This product works very well. I can't stress enough that you need to make sure the area is thoroughly cleaned. That includes the backing plate as well as the hub. Notice that I placed a half-size aluminum steam pan under the brake assembly to catch the brake clean in addition to all the particles and debris. These half-size steam pans are great for the garage. The best part is you can throw them away whenever you're done. I will leave a link in the description for half-size steam pans as well as all of the other products that are used in the video. Next, I'm going to remove the adjuster wheel. You're going to see that it just pulls right out of there. Oftentimes when you're cleaning the assembly, that will just fall out, so make sure you're careful. There should be 2 washers on the adjuster wheel. There is a red washer and then there's a silver colored washer. The red washer goes closest to the head of the adjuster wheel, followed by the silver washer. Next, I'm going to remove the slide. In this case, I just went to move it and it slipped, but nonetheless, it came out of there. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned that I was going to replace the shoes, the springs, and the drums. However, when I went to order the parts, it was actually cheaper for me to purchase the clusters, and I'm simply going to take those clusters apart and then use the new parts on the unit. So that's why I didn't spend too much time cleaning up the slide or the adjuster wheel, but I am going to clean them up off camera and then save them as spares. Now it is time to install the new slide mechanism. If I was using the old slide, I would obviously need to clean that up first. In this case, I removed the slide from the cluster that I ordered, and it didn't seem like the slide had the moly lubricant on there, which is what Club Car actually requires. If you've never used a dry moly lubricant before, this is actually a really cool process. So what you do is you actually spray the lubricant on the part of the slide that is actually going through the backing plate. You're not going to coat the entire slide. Obviously, this lubricant is only used for the slide itself. Do not use this lubricant on any other parts of the brake assembly. So I'm simply going to spray it onto the part that actually sticks through the backing plate. You'll notice that it sprays on there almost like spray paint. It is black, and then it will dry just about clear. Once I spray that part thoroughly that's going to stick through the backing plate, I'm going to go ahead and stand it up, and then I need to give it about 10 to 15 minutes to dry, and that's really important. Next, I'm going to apply DuPont Molykote BR2 Plus to the brake bosses. Now this is the specific grease that Club Car requires, and in this case I am applying it with a brush, which is also what they recommend. This is an excellent grease. It's very pricey, but as you can see, you're not using much at all. The brush that I'm using is actually used to apply flux on copper pipes. They're very cheap, so that's what I grabbed, and it actually worked out really well. So just be sure to take your time, and remember there are 3 raised bosses on each side of the assembly. So you'll notice there, now I'm catching the 3rd one that's down lower on the left-hand side, and then I'm obviously going to repeat the process on the right-hand side as well. I will leave a link to this grease in the description of the video in case you're interested in picking any of it up. As I said, it is a little bit pricey, but I've worked with a lot of greases before, and this is definitely one of the best that I've ever used. Once the bosses are greased, it's time to grease the slots at the top of the backing plate. That's what I'm doing now. Remember, you don't want a ton of grease. That's why you're encouraged to apply it with a brush. That way it's a very thin layer. At this point, I'm actually applying grease to the top and bottom of the brake shoes. Make sure that you don't get grease on the actual braking surface of the shoe. Be very careful with that. I actually use a steam pan so that I have a clean surface to lay them in until I actually install them onto the cart. If you found this video helpful, please smash the like button and consider subscribing to the channel. That way you don't miss out on any of my future videos. Next, I'm going to apply a thin coat of grease to the adjuster wheel. Remember, the only grease that you should be using throughout the assembly is the BR2+, except for the slide mechanism, which requires the moly coat. And if you look now, the moly coat is actually almost dried clear. It's ready to be inserted into the backing plate, and we can continue the reassembly process. I'm going to insert the slide, and then I'm going to insert the adjuster wheel. Typically, the adjuster wheel will stay in place because there's grease on it. You want to make sure that the slot is in the vertical position because this is what accepts the brake shoe. Now it's time to install the new brake shoes. Pay close attention to the marking on the shoe that I have on the right. It is marked 17T. 17T should be visible on the right-hand side, and there should be no markings visible on the left-hand side. The left-hand side is actually the one that's marked 17L. However, since we're working on the passenger side of the cart, 17L is not visible. If we were working on the driver's side of the cart, 17L would be visible on the top, and 17T would not be visible. The key thing to remember is that the 17L shoe always faces the rear of the cart, and the 17T shoe always faces the front of the cart. Install the top spring on the brake shoes, and then stretch the shoes apart to seat them in the slots at the top of the backing plate. It's okay if they flop forward, that's not going to be a problem. Now it's time to install the retainer pins and retainer clips. Keep in mind that you must install the pins and clips prior to installing the lower spring. When reinstalling the pin and clip on the left-hand side, I was able to push down on the clip with a flathead screwdriver and then turn the pin from the back. This actually made installation very simple. Sometimes this is not always possible, and you need to use a flathead screwdriver to push down on the clip while using a pair of needle nose pliers to rotate the pin. As you can see, the flat end of the pin must be horizontal to complete the installation. Additionally, it's worth mentioning the orientation of the retainer clips. Make sure that they are alternated. So in other words, in this case, the one on the left is facing down and the one on the right is facing up. Now it's time to install the lower spring. This can be a little bit tricky because in this case, I am right-handed and we need to actually hook the right-hand side of the spring first. So I used a flathead screwdriver to help guide the hook into the hole on the brake shoe. Then you can use a pair of needle nose pliers to stretch the spring and hook it into the left-hand side hole. Just be careful, you don't want to bend the spring, but it is going to be a little bit tight. You might even find vice grip pliers to be helpful in this particular scenario. I apologize because the camera placement for this particular step is not ideal, but you get the idea of what has to be done. Now it's time to install the new brake drum. First, I'm going to place the brake drum on the hub. I'm doing this for two reasons. The first reason is to ensure that the hub is square and nothing is bent. The second reason is to make cleaning the new brake drum very simple. You'll notice there's a lot of dust and particles coming off of it. It's important to understand that the manufacturing process often leaves oil and various residues on the brake drum. So you need to make sure you clean this before you install it on the cart. The last thing you want to use is a new brake drum that has oil on the inside surface. After spraying the brake drum with brake cleaner multiple times and rotating it to make sure I've covered the entire inside, I wipe the inside of the drum with a Scott shop towel. These towels are great for this, and this just makes sure that I've got any remaining residue off before I install it on the brake assembly. Before we place the drum on the brake assembly, it's important that we move the auto adjuster. Notice that I'm using 2 screwdrivers. In order to move the auto adjuster, you will need to use a screwdriver to raise the adjustment arm. Then you can use another screwdriver to adjust the wheel itself. After you turn the adjustment wheel a few rotations, go ahead and install the drum on the assembly. This is a process that takes a little bit of time because you may need to take the drum back off and readjust it. The goal is to get the drum to fit snugly, but if you adjust it too far, the drum will not fit at all. You'll also notice that I'm adjusting the wheel and it seems as though the adjustment arm is stuck in the up position. I do actually fix that off camera. That's why you don't see a second screwdriver involved in this process. But after multiple attempts, I finally get the fit for the drum that I'm looking for. It fits snugly, but it still is able to be turned. Now it's time to reinstall the passenger side wheel. I'm going to place the wheel on the lugs, and then I'm going to start the lug nuts by hand. This will avoid cross-threading, especially since I'm using an impact gun. This wraps up the brake replacement process for the passenger side. It also wraps up part 1 of the video. If you are interested in seeing the process for the driver's side, be sure to look at part 2. Additionally, part 2 explains the process for burnishing the new brake shoes. Be sure to check out the description below for all of the items used in this video. Finally, if you found this video helpful, be sure to smash that like button and consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss out on more helpful videos just like this one.